Good morning and welcome to our presentation on the April Dunn Act. We have with us a couple of special guests who will be presenting today, Rebecca Hanberry and Ashley Augustine. And I'm going to let Rebecca sort of further introduce them and tell you a little bit about where they come from and get us started on the presentation. She said if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat as you go. And it's okay to interrupt or to do that. And we'll be monitoring the chat and monitoring hand raises and all that. So we'll jump in. Rebecca, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Sharon. I appreciate it. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Also with us is Ashley Augustine from the department. I know there's some of you, I'm seeing some familiar names. Wallace, I haven't seen you in forever. Leanne, thanks for joining us. I'm seeing, let's see, Christy is here and Fenice. Anyways, but good morning to all of you. I'm just wanted to say good morning to some familiar names. So I'm happy to be here. Ashley's happy to be here. Today, this is probably of all the April Dunn Act presentations that I'm privileged to do, I think probably the parent one is my favorite. That's where the rubber meets the road for our kids and for our parents, is really knowing about April Dunn and the impact that it can have on your child's life. So whether you're a parent, whether you're in a staff member, administration, working in a district, I think this presentation will be beneficial to you. And I think the folks that work in the school system will find it as a tool that they can use, one more tool in their tool belt for effective implementation of April Dunn. So like Sharon said, if you have a question, there's two ways that you can ask it. You can A, drop it in the chat box, or B, just open your mic and ask it. If you're familiar with my presentation style, you know that occasionally I'll pause and say, are there any questions? But sometimes I get on this big old long roll and I don't. So I don't mind interruptions. I want to make this more of like a conversation style event. And also, one of my lines that I always say is, this is Vegas. If you have what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. And if you have things that you really need to talk about and questions that you need to ask them. There's not going to be any kind of, wow, that was a dumb question, or you shouldn't have asked that question. We are here today to really get into the weeds of April Dunn and make sure everybody understands it, so that by the time you walk away, you feel comfortable with what April Dunn can do and will do for not only your child, but for your student. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. The very first thing that I'd like to do, one more thing, in case you haven't looked at the chat box already, Ashley is really busy putting in links to the presentation for today. All right. The very first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to show you how to get to the presentation that we're actually going to use today. I know Ashley's she's put a link in the chat, but I want the link leads you to the Students with Disabilities library. And if you've never seen that library, that means you've probably never seen all of the brand new guidance documents, well, relatively new, within the last 2 to 3 years, that we've posted related to April Dunn. So I want to make sure that you know where those are. So let's go ahead. First thing we're going to do, give me 1 second, please. Sorry about that. Okay. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and take a look at how to get to those presentations. So what you should be looking at right now is a screenshot, a shared screen of the Louisiana Believes, or Louisiana Department of Education's website homepage, right? So the first thing we're going to do to get to the Students with Disabilities library, which is where all of the April Dunn information is, right? Now all nice in one area, is we're going to click on library up at the top. Now, if you're on a cell phone, it's going to be more of a scrolling down process that you use. But if you're on a computer, I like to say stay to the right. So once you click on library, you're going to stay to the right, right? You're going to then click on category. Then again on the right, under teaching and learning, you're going to click on students with disabilities. Now, not students with significant cognitive disabilities, but students with disabilities. Once you click there, you're in the library. So it's like 3 clicks, right? Then you're going to scroll halfway down, midway, and you're going to see where it says high school guidance. Under there, right, the next column is April Dunn Act resources. So all of these resources have been posted. We told you that by the end of June, we would get some new information. I'm saying we, the people on here that work for school staff or administration, we told you that we would have the self-assessment guide posted. It is. Understanding the self-assessment, sections 1 and 2. Understanding the section 2 recording has been posted. We are going to get section 1 recording posted as well. But today, what we're doing is we're reviewing this document right here, a parent guide to understanding the law. All right. And I've already downloaded that document. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to take a look and jump into that presentation. Give me 1 sec. Okay, there we go. Now you should see the presentation, the April Dunn Act, a parent guide to understanding the law. Hey, and let me say this real quick. Parents that are on the call, you noticed just now that I showed, let me see, you're probably not seeing, one more time, probably not seeing my screen any longer. Let me see. Okay, sorry, little technical glitch there. So parents, I wanted to tell you just now, I talked about something called a self-assessment guide. Well, the good news is that now the department has released what we're calling a self-assessment tool to districts, and that tool is going to help them start keeping an eye on how effective the implementation of April Dunn is working. How effective is it? So it might be in your best interest to also, once this presentation is over, to go take a look at that tool that I just showed you, the self-assessment guide. Jot that down if you want to. So what it is basically, in layman's terms, I guess you could say, is a monitoring tool. And so starting this February 2024, districts are going to actually perform their first self-assessment of how effective they are implementing, to gauge how effective they're implementing April Dunn in their district. So just a little tidbit of information to let you know that these types of things are also much like maybe IDEA and the compliance with IDEA is being monitored, so is April Dunn. All right. Okay, can everybody see, Sharon, if you will, or you or Ashley, you guys can see this presentation, right? I just want to make sure we're okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so what we hope to do today is kind of get an overview of the April Dunn Act. In order to really understand the April Dunn Act, you've got to know what the graduation requirements are in Louisiana. And you have to know how your child becomes eligible for the April Dunn Act. Then there's this thing called individual performance criteria. To be honest with you, that basically means goals and objectives on the IEP that will be included, that will determine what your child has to do in lieu of the assessment. We're also going to give you some information on the guidance that the department has shared with districts in how to develop these goals and objectives or individual performance criteria. Then we're going to give you some tips on how you can help your child succeed, not only in high school, but if April Dunn is applied to their high school experiences, what you can do to make sure that it's applied correctly and timely. And then we're going to look at some resources for you. All right. And by the way, all of these overview items are hot links. So you can click them and there's information behind them. Okay, so let's start out with a general understanding of what is the April Dunn Act. The April Dunn Act basically is a law. It started out as Act 833. It was passed in 2014. And it's named after a local Baton Rouge lady named April Dunn. She was a champion for students with disabilities. She actually was a person with a disability herself. She went through school. She left school without a diploma, although she made top grades in all of her subjects. She was a fantastic student. She could not pass the GEE. She was having trouble with that assessment. And so she didn't get a diploma. She actually went on to college. And so this law came into effect because of the work that she did along with other advocates. And it was a way, the law basically is supported and based on research that shows that students or people with disabilities have a lot of trouble with standardized tests. These tests that students have to take when they're in school, the LEAP test, the LEAP 2025 test. They have challenges. Those are standardized tests. And students with disabilities, they have challenges with standardized tests. And so basically the heart of the April Dunn Act is to help sort of remove that challenge and as a roadblock, remove that roadblock and allow them to show in their own way that they have mastered the courses. All right. So to really, it does that through an IEP team getting together, of which you, mom and dad, are a member of. And that IEP team develops what we call individual performance criteria, also known as goals and objectives, on the IEP. And we'll dig into that a little bit later. Now, to understand April Dunn, the April Dunn Act, though, the very beginning of understanding starts with understanding what your child must do in the state of Louisiana to earn a high school diploma. So let's take a quick look at the graduation, the two different ways that your child can earn a diploma in the state of Louisiana. Going to be honest with you, before Jumpstart and before the April Dunn Act, anybody that has ever worked or had a child go through the education system in the state of Louisiana could tell you that it was so convoluted and confusing as to how many different ways a child could get a diploma. There were a ton of different ways. Now there's just two, and it makes it so incredibly easy. So you have the decision that you have to make as to which pathway to go on is your child going to go to college, or is your child going to move more toward that vocational technical career pathway that leads straight to a job, or maybe to a community college after high school, or some kind of vocational training, right? So your child's either going to choose what we call the university pathway. That's a traditional high school pathway that prepares a student to go to a 4-year college. Or is your child going to go more on a career pathway? Maybe they want to be a welder. Lord knows, a job in welding, they can get paid a lot of money. So there's nothing wrong with choosing to go more of a career pathway. If they do, then the Jumpstart pathway is more for your child. They'll go to work, or they'll continue their education at starting off slowly at a 2-year community college, or do both. They'll get a job and they'll go to a 2-year community college. Now, don't get me wrong. Jumpstart doesn't mean they can't go eventually to a 4-year college, but it's more of a, hey, let's start off with a career, and at the same time, let's go maybe start further our education slowly at a 2-year community college. Okay? Any questions? You guys have any questions? Okay. Now we're going to dig in to each pathway. So let's first take a look at the university pathway. So to get a diploma on the university pathway, there's of course requirements. There's typically 3 or 4 requirements on each pathway. So the very first one is they have to earn a minimum of 24 Carnegie credits. So they're going to be addressing 24 different courses, right? And then there's in addition to the coursework, the different subjects that courses that they have to take, there's also a state assessment requirement. You know, those standardized tests that I mentioned earlier, those LEAP tests, right? Used to call them end of course test. I really like using that description because it basically describes what they are. For example, at the end of English 1, there's an assessment. It's something that you take at the end of the course. It is a standardized test that the state of Louisiana has worked with test developers to make, and it's called the LEAP 2025 ELA 1 assessment. And so when they take that assessment, they have to get either an approaching basic. There's different scores that they can get. Unsatisfactory is the lowest score, and if they get that, they're not passing that test. Doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to pass the class. Just means they're not passing that test. And when they don't pass the test, remember, this is one of the requirements to get a diploma. There's assessments that you have to pass. So if they don't pass that test, then they're like for English, there's 3 sets of assessments. There's 2 English assessments, 2 math type assessments, and then there's biology and US history. They have to pass 1 test in each of those sets. So a total of 3, right? That's on the university pathway. They also have to complete a free application for federal student aid. You'll hear your folks at your high school where your child goes to high school. You'll hear them say they gotta fill out that FAFSA. They gotta fill out the FAFSA. Well, that's what this is. It's an application for student aid, and it's free to fill it out, and it's a requirement of the pathway. Okay, and then after successful completion of all these requirements, your child will leave with a diploma ready to attend a 4-year college. Thank you, Roxanne. She said now civics and geometry have been added to the criteria. So the two Englishes, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, is ELA 1, English 1, and English 2. In the math area, we have algebra and geometry. And then in the civics or US history science area, we have US history. Is it US civics instead of US history, or is it civics, US history, biology? Like one, it can't be all 3 of those, right? Is it still US history and biology? Okay, so far this year, it's still US history and biology. Eventually, I guess US history or civics and biology. Roxanne said eventually it will become. You know, y'all, parents, Bessie, the Board of Elementary Secondary Education, they make changes like this. And eventually what they do is they say, hey, so we're going to make it US history or civics and biology in that third pair. They usually give it like a starting date, and it's typically 1-2 years out, whenever this new rule will start. So I'm not quite sure of when the civics is going to be thrown in there. Susan said it's biology and US history this year. It will be government starting with this year's freshmen. Okay, cool. Thank y'all very much. I appreciate it. Haven't kept up with the latest in those changes. So in other words, this year, if your child is entering a freshman as a freshman in high school this year, they'll have a government, they'll have to pass a government and a biology, which would be either civics or US history.
Rebecca,
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. This
No,
year, the civics is going to be a field test.
Okay.
It is actually going to begin with the 24-25 incoming freshmen.
So not next year, the 24-25.
Next year is just a field test for civics, so it is still US history for next year's incoming freshmen.
Okay. Thank you for that information.
I apologize. I'm a supervisor of curriculum instruction. I'm just listening to get more information.
No, I totally appreciate that. I'm more of an April Dunn person.
I was going to
But
type it in the chat. It's taking
yeah.
too long. I'm just gonna
No, it's
unmute.
too much. I got you. Yep.
I
Thank you very
apologize.
much.
You're
No,
welcome.
no, not at all.
All
So
right.
there you go. So you got it. So in 24-25, civics will officially become one of the two government options that your child will have. So I hope that didn't totally confuse y'all. Bottom line is you got 24 Carnegie units you got to earn, that your child will have to earn. You have some assessments. There's 3 different categories of assessments: English, math, government, and biology. That government and biology make up the third pair. And then there's this student aid application that has to be filled out. Okay. Now let's talk about the university pathway. I'm sorry, the Jumpstart pathway. So remember, Jumpstart's all about when they leave, they're going to have an option of a career to go ahead and start a career. And then also at the same time, they could enroll in a community college. So Jumpstart's just a tad bit different as to what they have to do. In Jumpstart, they have to earn a minimum of 23 Carnegie units. So there's one less unit that has to be earned, but they have to earn that 24th credit takes on the form of what we call a credential or an industry-based certification, short IBC. We always like to break it down into some kind of acronym. They're also going to have assessments. Same thing. They have to score approaching basic or above, right? And they're going to have to complete that federal student aid as well. So let's talk for a minute about what an IBC is, an industry-based certification. So when you enter any field, like for example, when I decided to become a teacher, I had to take some tests and I had to pass them. My tests were called a praxis. Well, in different industries, there's always going to be a test. Like for example, if you want to become a welder, I know I keep using that example, but if you want to become a welder, you're going to take a welding assessment. And when you finish that, you get a certificate in welding saying that you have met the minimum requirements to be a welder. That is an example of what we call an industry-based certification. If you'd like to go to the Jumpstart website, if you go to louisianabelieves.com and I think down in the lower right-hand corner of the very first page, the home page of the website, you'll see a link to Jumpstart. And you can see there's a ton of different fields, areas, industry that your child can choose from as far as where they're going to go when they leave us after the 12th grade. The cool thing about it is, y'all, this didn't exist when I was in high school, but you know, I've heard of some students in high school actually leaving with like a CNA certification, a certified nursing assistant certification. They can leaving with a welding certificate, entering the welding field straight out of high school. So it's really cool. Jumpstart offers our students so many opportunities to just jump right into the workforce when they leave, and to continue their education on a post-secondary level if they want to. So I'm going to pause for a minute and ask, are there any questions about the 2 graduation pathways in the state of Louisiana? Okay, now let's talk about how April Dunn affects these pathways, right? So when comparing the 2 pathways, you see similar requirements, including those state assessments. Taking these assessments, these tests, these end of course tests that I talked about, or an industry-based certification test, if you're on the Jumpstart pathway, it's a requirement on both pathways. If your child is eligible for the April Dunn Act, then the IEP team has the right to develop individual performance criteria or goals and objectives, for your child to show that they have mastered and understand the course material in lieu of achieving that minimum of approaching basic on that state assessment. Okay, now I'm going to repeat that again because this is the heart of April Dunn. Remember, I told you when April was in school, she made great grades. The challenge she had was with the test, the state assessment at the time when she went to high school. It stopped her from getting a diploma. It was a roadblock. What April Dunn does is it removes that roadblock for students with disabilities where the state assessment is concerned. What April Dunn does not do, it does not compromise your child's experience in the integrity or the rigor of the teaching or the requirements to actually pass the class. And that's important for you as a parent to understand. Your child still has to be in class. They still have to do everything that any other child has to do. They still have to earn the Carnegie credit. So when they take English 1, they still have to earn everything that any other child sitting in that class has to do. So your child's educational experience is not and should not be compromised because of April Dunn. The only thing that April Dunn is meant to do is to remove the roadblock presented by the state assessment. When they're in English 1 and they pass that class, they earn the grade, right? They've done everything that any other child has done. Then it comes time for the end of course test for English 1. Research shows that students with disabilities have challenges with that assessment. Let me say this, they can have challenges with that assessment. Doesn't necessarily mean they will. So what April Dunn does is it allows the IEP team to put in goals and objectives in your child's IEP, of which you will be a part of to decide, that allow your child to show that they understand English 1, they've mastered the concepts in a different way other than using that test to show that they've mastered the course. Okay? Doesn't mean that they don't take the test. They still have to take the assessment. It just means that they're showing in a different way that they've mastered the course. All right. Any questions? Because what I'd like to do now is move on to how your child becomes eligible for April Dunn. We're going to talk a little bit more about those goals and objectives and how and that process. So I don't want to cover that too much, but I'm going to pause, see if there's any questions about how April Dunn affects your child's graduation pathways. And then we'll go to move on to how your child becomes eligible. Okay, I see in the chat, the question is there a certain number of times the student must take the test? So it depends on whether we are talking about eligibility or whether we are talking about the child is already eligible. April Dunn has been applied and now they've taken the test and they failed the test. It depends on where we are in the game, Sandy. If we are looking at whether the child is going to be eligible for April Dunn and they are already in high school and they're not eligible, then they have to fail the test twice, the same test. Okay? So that's it, but that's an eligibility thing. If they're already eligible and they have April Dunn applied to their IEP, there's goals and objectives that are saying, hey, if you don't pass the test, you have to achieve these goals and objectives. If that's the situation we're talking about, then they only have to fail that test once. They don't have to take the test again. So see, I can't give you a real clean cut answer. It depends on where we are in the game. All right. Let's see. No problem, Sandy. So Diane, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, said, so will there be a class assessment to school mastery or just obtain the goals? The way that April Dunn is set up is that they have to achieve the goals and objectives. So no, there is not a class assessment to school mastery. Now, if the IEP team decides that there will be an assessment, if the district has decided to develop some type of assessment that will show mastery, that could be a possibility. I think I would prefer to talk to that district to see what's going on, but that could be, the state cannot tell an IEP team what to do, but the state can definitely establish guidelines. Does LEAP or LEAP Connect status impact whether you can qualify for a diploma? What if your child is LEAP Connect? Michelle, LEAP Connect has nothing to do with April Dunn. LEAP Connect is its own entity in itself. To be eligible for a LEAP Connect, for the diploma pathway, there is a diploma pathway for LEAP Connect students. And to be eligible for that pathway, the student has to be eligible for the alternate assessment. Once they're eligible for the alternate assessment, they are eligible to travel on the LEAP Connect diploma pathway. They do have to meet certain requirements. There are requirements on that pathway, just like any other pathway. If the student has achieved the IEP objectives but has excessive absences in the class, can the teacher record fail the student because of absences? Debbie, I don't think that that's a April Dunn question. Ashley, you correct me if I'm wrong, please. Absences, the April Dunn objectives do not alleviate the requirement of a student being in school. A student being in school is a requirement that every student has for being in school. If a student is a student with a disability and they are, there's some reason why there's so many absences, that's like an outlier and an individual situation that must be looked at. I'm answering that question in a general setting. In a general setting, there is an attendance requirement. And I don't think April Dunn relieves a student of that attendance requirement. Ashley, would you agree?
Yes, absolutely, Rebecca.
Okay. So Shannon said, what if they pass the high set test? Shannon, I think I'm going to need some more questions. I'm sorry, some more details. Okay, while we're waiting for more details from Shannon, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with eligibility. I think a lot of some of the questions that you guys are asking will be answered as we go through the presentation. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna go back. Sometimes whenever we talk about April Dunn, we can get in the weeds really quick. And if you'll allow me to move on with eligibility, we can probably answer some of the questions you guys are having right now. So let's talk about eligibility. How did your child become eligible? So first, let's talk about who is eligible for the April Dunn Act. So the law says that basically any student with a disability, as defined by RS 17:1942 B. So basically, it's safe for us to say as identified within the confines of 1508. That's a law that in IDEA, which a portion that actually lists like the disabilities that fall under IDEA. 504 is not, I can tell you that, right? So just to give you some clarification. So except a student that is gifted and talented with no other exceptionality. Any student with a disability except the gifted and talented, no other exceptionality, should be examined by IEP teams for eligibility for the April Dunn Act. Okay? In other words, any student with an IEP, not an IAP. IAP are provided to students who receive 504 accommodations. They should be examined for eligibility for the April Dunn Act. If your child has an IEP and has been identified as gifted and talented, they must have another exceptionality to be considered for the April Dunn Act. Okay? So how does your child become eligible? The IEP team determines eligibility for your child. Now, when you enter the IEP team meeting, representatives of your school may walk in and say, we've examined the data and your child is eligible for the April Dunn Act. The department encourages districts to keep an eye on data like this. So they're not, when they enter the IEP meeting and they say your child is eligible, they're not telling you that you have to accept eligibility. They're giving you this information as a parent to let you know that we've examined the data and according to the eligibility, your child could be eligible. And then they're going to start a discussion with you as to whether you want to make your child eligible for April Dunn. But it is an IEP team decision. So as a team, you'll discuss the pluses. I really can't imagine some of the minuses. I don't. I mean, the only minus I could imagine is sometimes kids start talking, hey, I got April Dunn applied on my IEP. That means I don't have to pass that test. That's one of the minuses I could see for April Dunn. And that does happen. Word gets around. Kids aren't dumb, you know? But other than that, April Dunn is a fabulous tool for your child. It does not and should not compromise their education. The only thing it does is gets them over the hurdle of the standardized assessment. So it's really not, a bad thing. So the team, the members from your school will enter with this information. We've looked at the data. Your child is eligible for April Dunn. Now let's talk about whether we want to apply. So what makes your child eligible? And this is extremely important. It's something that you as a parent can do to keep track and to help your school with making sure that all the timelines related to April Dunn are met. Okay? Because we're going to find out in a little while that there's a very important timeline that if your child doesn't meet that timeline, it's not so good. Okay? So we're going to talk in two categories. Number one, we're going to talk about a student that is entering high school. That's one set of criteria. Number two, we're going to talk about a student that already entered high school and was not eligible when they entered. How do they become? They can become eligible after they enter high school. And we're going to talk about the criteria for that child. So there's child A and there's child B. Child A is a student entering high school, right? They've finished middle school. They've just left the 8th grade. Now they're about to go into the 9th grade. So what a team does that's at your school is they take a look at data from the 3 most recent years. So they look at the test score, state assessment, LEAP 2025, y'all. Parents, it's important you understand that. The only assessment results they're looking at are the state assessments, the LEAP scores. So in the 6th grade, when your child takes that test, in the 7th grade, when your child takes those tests, it's not just one. In the 8th grade, when your child takes those assessments, you need to know what those scores are. What did they score? If they scored an approaching basic or above, that's what you want, something like that. But we're going to talk, well, actually in some situation, in 6th and 7th grade situation, you want 2 basics at least. So I don't want to jump ahead, right? So what April Dunn says is you're going to look at the 3 most recent years. The 3 most recent years of state assessments for a child entering the 9th grade is the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade state assessment results, right? In order to qualify for April Dunn, your child has to, I'm going to use the word fail. In reality, it's not meet state benchmark for 2 of the 3 most recent years. Not meet state benchmark means they failed to get the lowest minimum score. So if the lowest minimum score is approaching basic and they got unsatisfactory, they did not meet state benchmark. The state says, here's what you got to meet. This is the lowest score you can meet. And if they don't meet that score, then they failed to meet it. If they did that for 2 of the 3 most recent years, then they are eligible for April Dunn. Okay, now let's talk about what state benchmark is before we move to student B. State benchmark, in order to be considered a passing grade, the state benchmark for passing your LEAP assessments for 6th and 7th grade. It's different for 8th. I'm sorry. For 6th and 7th grade, your student takes 4 assessments: ELA, math, science, and social studies. The state benchmark is they have to score 2 basics. So remember, we talked about approaching basic. We're going 1 more rung up the ladder to basic. They have to score 2 basics, either on ELA and math, math and science, science and social studies. It doesn't matter. any combination. They can score a basic on science and a basic on social studies, and they've met state benchmark. They just have to have 2 basics on any 2 of those assessments. If they get that, then they are not eligible. If they do that for 3 years, 2 years, in the 6th and 7th grade, then they're not eligible for April Dunn. If they do it in the 7th and 8th, if they do it all 3 years, they're not eligible. The only thing, I'm not mentioning 8th because 8th has a different state benchmark. Okay?
Hey, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to call out a question that we got in the chat and make sure like your explanation will answer the question. It says, do they have to score approaching basic or better in all sections of the LEAP for the 2 out of 3 years?
No, that is not the state benchmark. I appreciate you calling that out. The state benchmark says 2 basics in 6th and 7th grade. In 8th grade, it's a basic approaching basic combo. Do they have to score a B or better in all sections of the LEAP for the 2 of the 3? B, they have to score 2 basics. The state benchmark for considered passing or meeting state benchmark for 6th and 7th grade is scoring 2 basics on the assessments. Now, let's say they score a basic on science and a basic on social studies. If they score an unsat, I don't want to get into that. That's really, really complicated. Just know that for the purposes of April Dunn, what your team is looking for is 2 basics. If they do not score at least 2 basics on any of the 4 assessments, you understand what I'm saying? If they do not score 2 basics on any 4 of the assessments, they are eligible for April Dunn. You got it? Now let's talk about 8th grade. Remember, we're still on student A. Student A just finished 8th grade, is entering 9th grade. The assessment requirement, state benchmark assessment requirement for 8th grade is different. For 8th grade, you have to score a basic, approaching basic combination. So in 8th grade, what's mainly looked at for your child is ELA and math. Okay? They can score either a basic in English, an approaching basic in math, or they can score an approaching basic in English and a basic in math. So if you noticed, I said basic, approaching basic, and that can be in any order. It can either be basic English or basic math, or approaching basic English, approaching basic math. Okay, that's why you'll hear people call it a basic, approaching basic combination. Doesn't matter which test you get either one of those scores, just as long as you have that combination of results. In a minute, I think I included, let me go forward real quick, y'all. Sorry, give me 1 second. Yeah, yep. So in a minute, we're gonna look in more detail. We're gonna use students to talk about this scenario. So stay with me. I know this can get really complicated. If you're not familiar with what scores your child has to have, it can get really, really confusing. So we got student A that is entering the 9th grade. The IEP team or staff, school staff, district staff is looking at, they're tracking these kids. They're making sure we've encouraged them to begin tracking them in the 6th grade. Look at those test results in the 6th grade. See how they're doing. See if they scored those 2 basics that they need in the 6th grade. If they didn't, then that's 1 year towards the 2 that they actually could be possible, could be eligible for April Dunn. Remember, they're looking at 3 years worth of scores. And if your child does not achieve the state benchmark out of 2 of those years, they're eligible for April Dunn entering high school. So starting in the 9th grade, they could actually have April Dunn applied. Okay. Now let's talk about student B. And parents, always remember, there's one set of benchmarks requirements for 6th and 7th grade, and there's a different set for 8th grade. So 7th grade, 2 basics. 6th, 7th grade, you're looking for 2 basics. 8th grade, you're looking for a basic, approaching basic combination. If they don't meet that, they're eligible for April Dunn. So now let's talk about student B. Student B is a student that when the school staff looked at those 6th and 7th and 8th grade scores, when he was just entering high school, he achieved his state benchmarks. So that student is not eligible for April Dunn in the 9th grade. But at the end of, typically you're going to see that when your child starts high school, right off the bat, they're gonna take some of these classes that have these end of course tests. Not every class has an end of course test. Just those core subjects, your English, your math, your history, your sciences, they have these tests, right? These state assessments, these LEAP tests. So typically a district, when they schedule a student in the 9th grade, they're going to schedule them with probably an English 1 and even an algebra. So right off the bat, 9th grade, your child's going to see some of these state assessments at the end of a course. If your child enters high school and is not eligible for April Dunn, once they take that state assessment, any state assessment, the very first one that they take, that school, that district, you as a parent, you can no longer look at the 6th and 7th and 8th grade scores, period. From that point forward, you have to use what we call the high school score. Those 6th, 7th, and 8th grade scores are middle school scores. Once they get into high school and they're not eligible for April Dunn, right? They could still become eligible later on, but they're not eligible in the 9th grade. From that point forward, once they take that first high school LEAP assessment, you can no longer use the middle school scores to see if a child is eligible for April Dunn. So once they enter high school, they're not eligible, and they take that, let's say they have English 1 in the 9th grade when they go in. They don't have the help of April Dunn because they weren't eligible. They go through the course, they take the test. That's it. You can't use middle school scores anymore. If they pass that test, that's fantastic. That's great news. Can't use that test for April Dunn. If they failed that test, then they go through what's called remediation. They're tutored and they take the test again. If they fail that same test, has to be the same test, a second time, bam, they're eligible for April Dunn. So do you see the difference between the two criteria? There's a criteria for a student entering school, entering high school in 9th grade. We use the middle school scores. Then there's a criteria for a student that entered ineligible, took the high school state assessment, then we use the results of the high school assessment. Okay? All right. That's basically what I'm talking about here. Now I want to go over this one more time. And I know I'm probably beating a dead horse at this point in time, but I want to go over it one more time because I want to make sure you understand this. And to do that, we're going to use examples. So I want you to meet Emma on the left and Malik on the right. Emma is our student A. She is entering the 9th grade. Malik is our student B. He's a 10th grader, and he entered high school and was not eligible for April Dunn. Okay? He met the state benchmark on his middle school scores. All right? We're going to start with Emma. She is entering the 9th grade. Her IEP must determine if she's eligible for April Dunn. To be eligible, Emma must enter high school without having achieved. In other words, she did not meet the state established benchmarks on her middle school scores for the LEAP test. She didn't meet 2 of the 3 most recent years. That's what the law says. And the 3 most recent years are 6th, 7th, and 8th. All right? So let's look. To pass a LEAP 2025 state assessment in these grades, Emma must score the following. In 6th and 7th grade, she has to have at least basic on 2 of the 4 tests that are administered. In 8th grade, she has to have that combo I was talking about, a combination of either basic and approaching basic in either ELA or math. And for example, your child would score an approaching basic on ELA and basic on math, or approaching basic on math, basic on ELA. Okay? So we look at what Emma did, right? So in the 6th grade, Emma got unsatisfactory on ELA, basic on math, approaching basic on science, approaching basic on social studies. So when you look at that, did Emma score 2 basics on anything? All I see is a basic on math. She did not achieve what the state wanted her to achieve. Therefore, this is one set of data that supports her possibly being eligible for the April Dunn Act. In the 7th grade, she got unsat on ELA, approaching basic math, basic science, basic social studies. Did Emma achieve what the state wanted her to do? Yes, she did. She got 2 basics. Now let's look at 8th. And remember, 8th is different. We're not looking for 2 basics in 8th. In 8th grade, Emma got unsatisfactory on ELA and approaching basic on math. Remember, the standard we're shooting for, the benchmark we're shooting for, the goal is to get a basic, approaching basic combination. Doesn't matter whether you get it on ELA or math, doesn't matter the order, as long as you get a basic, approaching basic. Did she achieve that standard? No. So this is the second set of data that supports her becoming eligible for April Dunn. So of the last 3 years, the 3 most recent years data that we're looking at, 2 of them she did not achieve the state benchmark. All right. So basically, the IEP team found Emma did not pass the state benchmark on the LEAP 2025 state assessment in 2 of the 3 most recent years, those 2 being 6th and 8th grade. Therefore, Emma is eligible. All right. Now let's take a look at a student, Malik, that already entered high school. He's in the 10th grade right now. And when he entered high school, he was not eligible for April Dunn. The assessment that I was just talking about, all the assessments we looked at for Emma, Malik, he met state benchmark in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So when he started 9th grade, he was not eligible for April Dunn. What I want you to know is just because your child is not eligible when they enter the 9th grade, that doesn't mean they will never be looked at again for eligibility. And as a parent, it's extremely important that you make sure to stay on top of this so that number one, know that if your child enters the 9th grade, enters high school, and they're not eligible, it doesn't mean that they will never have a chance to become eligible again. They can. And that should be something that is looked at every time your child takes a state assessment. You should look at if they fail, especially if they fail that state assessment, there's an opportunity for you to see if your child could become eligible. And that's important for you as a parent to know. All right. So Malik is entering the 10th grade. Unlike Emma, Malik was not eligible for the April Dunn Act when he entered the 9th grade. Since entering, Malik has taken at least one LEAP 2025 assessment. And remember what I told you. Once Malik took that first state assessment, there's no using those middle school scores anymore. Okay? From this point forward, you got to use those high school scores. Okay? So when he took that at the end of the 9th grade, he took a LEAP 2025 high school assessment, not a middle school, high school. His IEP team checked him for eligibility after these tests. And that's what school systems should do. We have been talking to school systems about developing and making sure they have really good procedures. And among those procedures, we've been asking them, when are you going to examine eligibility? Eligibility should be examined when a student enters high school. And every time, once they're in high school, if they're not eligible, every time they take a state assessment, eligibility should be examined. We're encouraging districts actually to start tracking students after the 6th grade. Keep an eye on the state assessments. You could literally know whether, well, we won't go there, but just know that school districts are being encouraged to develop timelines and procedures about when they will look at a student for eligibility. As a parent, you know that if your child entered high school and they weren't eligible, every time your child takes a state assessment, you need to know what the results are on that test. If they failed that test, they're going to be remediated. If they fail, and they're going to take that test one more time. If they fail that same test a second time, your child is now eligible for April Dunn. Okay? At the end of the 9th grade, Malik took an Algebra 1 assessment. The IEP team found that he scored unsatisfactory. So what happens? Bessie says the Board of Elementary Secondary Education requires that after a child fails that assessment one time, they have to go through remediation, a tutoring type thing, right? So that Malik went through summer remediation and he takes the assessment again. After he takes the assessment the second time, it's got to be the same assessment twice. He scored unsatisfactory. Because he did not achieve, simpler words, he didn't pass, the state established benchmarks after 2 attempts of the same test, He's now eligible for April Dunn. Okay. So we see for Emma and Malik, there are different times a student can be examined or looked at for eligibility for the April Dunn Act. Emma was examined upon entering prior to the 9th grade. Malik was examined after he was examined at the same time Emma was, but he was found ineligible. So then he was examined again after he took his first high school assessment. Okay, so at a minimum, your child's IEP team should examine eligibility at these points. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute because we're about to get into individual performance criteria and see if there's any questions. That was eligibility. Parents, school staff that are on here, administration, I'm preaching and preaching. It's so easy for you to think about April Dunn if you put the components of April Dunn into silos. The first silo is eligibility. Is my child eligible? The second silo is application. Application, creating the goals and objectives, when to create the goals and objectives, how to create the goals and objectives. Then the third silo is documenting achievement. Okay. If Malik fails 9th grade LEAP, chooses to not attend summer school, retest next December, and fails again, is he still eligible? Yes. Right now, students do not need geometry if on Jumpstart. That is correct, Heather. All right, let's talk about individual performance criteria. Okay, so now your child is eligible. You're at the IEP team meeting. You decide we're going to apply April Dunn. So there's a okay, I'm going to pause for a minute. Heather has a follow-up question. It says, if a child fails Algebra 1 and it's the first failure for eligibility, but they've passed the class, do they need another remediation and take the LEAP a third time? If they failed it one, if they passed the class and they failed the algebra assessment, and currently they're on Jumpstart, I understand what you meant. And then they failed it a second time. So, you know what, Heather, if this is a question, Heather, I think instead of, I think I would rather answer this question offline. This can get really into the weeds, and I think this would be a question that would really confuse a lot of people. So there's two different things you're talking about in your question. There's outside of April Dunn, your child's gonna, if they don't go through remediation, they're gonna have to take the test a second time to become eligible for April Dunn. Okay. So, but to address the other situation, I think I would like to talk offline about this, and what we can do is Ashley and I can send you our email addresses, and you can email both of us, and we can respond. I don't want to create more confusion. And I know there's the question of how many times my kid is taking the test. I understand that. I appreciate that question. I do. There's just not a one size fits all answer to how many times does my kid have to take a LEAP test? There's the answer related to eligibility. There's an answer related to BESI rules. there's to accountability, there's an answer related to what your district decides. So it can get really convoluted fast. So if you're okay with it, we'll include our email address and you can email us. Right now, let's go ahead and move forward with individual performance criteria. So your child is your child is now eligible, and you're in the IEP meeting, and it's time to develop some goals and objectives. So basically, the goals and objectives that you guys are going to develop are related to how the child is going to satisfy. Remember, there's a diploma pathway requirement. Your child has to pass some of these assessments. So what you're doing is you're developing goals and objectives that say, okay, Emma, you have April Dunn applied. Just in case you do not pass the English 1 assessment, if you do not pass it, you have to achieve these goals and objectives. And so the goals and objectives, they're not supposed to be these easy things that your child's going to do. They're supposed to be rigorous, and they're supposed to address the scope and sequence of the course. Okay, so I need you to understand that. They are supposed to be individualized to your child and their strengths. So it's important for you to understand that April Dunn does not give your child an easy way out. And I don't mean that by easy versus hard. Nobody's trying to kill your child, as far as, not kill, I shouldn't use that word. No one's trying to just really bear down hard on your child. They're trying to make sure that your child gets a rigorous, high expectation filled education. And so the problem is that these assessments, some students with disabilities have challenges with the assessment. And so what the goals and objectives are supposed to do is give them another way to show that they understand English. English 1, Algebra 1, geometry, history, biology, civics. Okay, that's what they're supposed to do. So it allows your child to show that they've mastered the course standards, and the individual performance criteria are basically expressed in goals and objectives. If your child achieves the goals and objectives, then for the purposes of that requirement on the graduation pathway, they've achieved that requirement. Okay? For the purposes of the industry-based certification, it can also be applied to that. I'm sorry, I started looking in the chat. I'm going to stop looking in the chat. I'm going to get back to what I was talking about. So your child will still have to take the test. These goals and objectives, they're not in lieu of the test itself. They're in lieu of the requirement to pass the state assessment on the graduation pathway. All right. And I will tell you that there are some districts that have developed a rubric. In the very beginning of April Dunn, one district in particular, they developed a rubric. They got together the team of content managers, content experts. So in other words, you're experts in English, you're experts in science, and your science, your math. They got them together, and they got them together with special ed experts, right? And together, those teams developed rubrics for each end of course test, each LEAP test that your child would take, right? And so in this particular district, when a team member walks into the IEP, the staff member from the IEP team, when they walk in, they'll walk in with this rubric, and then they individualize it to your child's strengths. Okay, so you may see that when you walk into an IEP, and that's not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, to me, it's an opportunity to create rigor. It's an opportunity to uphold expectation for your child. And it's an opportunity to make sure that it's individualized. So don't be afraid if this person walks in from the school staff or the district staff, and they have some rubrics, and they sit down and they start talking to you about these rubrics. Okay. So one thing that the April Dunn Act does not give IEP teams is the authority to compromise the standards or the requirements of any course. So don't think that you'll walk into an IEP team meeting and you're going to talk about what your child does or does not have to do in that course. The requirements are the same. All right. IEP teams are expected to develop performance criteria or goals and objectives that address the entire course. We say the scope and sequence of the course. Now and to maintain the rigor and expectations of an academic achievement. Your child must achieve the requirements of the course. If you feel the IEP team has failed to create rigorous individual performance criteria, speak up, please. All right? Express your concerns in the IEP meeting. All right?
Hey, Rebecca.
Yes, ma'am.
We received a couple of questions in the chat, and I just wanted to address them before you moved on, because it kind of pertains to that last slide.
Okay.
So the first is, to earn the Carnegie unit, the student has to achieve goals and objectives and get a passing grade in that course, correct?
So to achieve the Carnegie unit, the student has to get a passing grade. To achieve the requirements, the graduation pathway requirements for the state assessment, the child has to achieve the goals and objectives. Now, I think it's going to be pretty darn difficult to find a child that does not achieve the goals and objectives, but gets a passing grade in the class. I know that sounds convoluted, so let me say it one more time. The question is, does a child have to achieve the goals and objectives and get a passing grade in the class to get the Carnegie unit? My answer to that is, I do not know how the child would get a passing grade in the class and not achieve the goals and objectives. To get credit for the requirement related to the assessment, the child absolutely has to pass the goal, to achieve the goals and objectives. Okay, Ashley, what's the next one?
Great, thanks, Rebecca. And then the last question, which is a great question. Are there a certain number of goals and objectives to achieve? Should all these be listed on the IEP, or can it be summarized according to the April Dunn document achievement form for that specific course?
Okay, so all the goals and objectives need to be listed on the IEP. Now, I think I see that it's Tamika. Tamika, I think I know where the spirit of your question, and correct me if I'm wrong. When I say that you have to address the scope and sequence of the course, right? In other words, you got to hit the standards. You're probably thinking, good Lord, in any given course, there might be 57, I'm making up a number, 57 standards, right? Do I have to have 57 objectives with one goal for English? And the answer to that is no. If you'd like to see some really good examples of what goals and objectives could look like, we've included that in the April Dunn Act library. And I think it's titled, Ashley, can you remember sample goals and objectives? I can't remember the name of that document.
I can't either, Rebecca, but I will look it up and drop it in the chat.
Let me go look. Actually, I just flipped right back over.
Okay, great.
Let me see. Okay, sample individualized performance criteria. Hang on. Let me share. Right here. You see that document? That document right there has some fantastic examples from the department of what goals and objectives can look like. Now, Tamika, are you a parent or are you a district worker, employee, sorry? Okay, all right. Then I need to let you know that we have strongly encouraged districts to not copy and paste those. It's a good foundation to start with, and then you can individualize to the student. But I bet you already knew that, right? So if I'm talking to a parents, there are examples out there of goals and objectives, right? And as you heard me tell Tamika, we've strongly encouraged them not to copy and paste those goals and objectives, but to individualize those goals and objectives for your child. So make sure that that happens. Go take a look at those and make sure that happens. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to go back to the presentation. Okay, so now let's talk about developing these individual performance criteria. You're more than welcome, Tamika. Thanks for your question. That was a good question. So the IEP team is responsible for developing and applying these goals and objectives, right? We call them individual performance criteria, right? The following key people should be in attendance in an IEP meeting. You should have an administrator there. You should have a teacher of the course. So in other words, if you're talking about English, there should be an English teacher there. If you're talking about math, there should be a math teacher there. A special education teacher, the teacher that's going to take care of your child's IEP, that's going to actually hold, we call it the IEP holder. That teacher should definitely be there. And of course, you. And in high school, we always love, it is best practice to include your child. Now, are there parts that maybe you don't want your child in there for? Yes, and I completely understand that. But best practice is to begin teaching your child how to advocate for themselves. And there's no better place to start that than within an IEP meeting. All right. So with all of these people making up the team, there should be some really good, performance criteria, goals, and objectives put in place, right? So what you want to do is you want to collaborate with the teachers. You never, ever want to forget strategies and supports your child's going to need, right? Just because you're writing goals and objectives for April Dunn doesn't mean there's no longer going to be some supports. There needs to be supports in place as well. Also, you want to make sure that the goals and objectives that are written by the IEP team are measurable and that they reflect those strategies. So by measurable, when are we going to take a look at these goals? How often are we going to take a look at these goals? How are we going to keep data to see if my child's achieved these goals? Another thing that you want to look for is, do the objectives. So the goal is going to be that main Mac Daddy goal up top, right? And then you're going to have these little smaller mini goals that we call objectives. So do these objectives, when they're completed, when they're achieved, do they all add up and roll up into the achievement of that big goal? That's how objectives are supposed to work. They're supposed to all be something related to the goal, and each of them plays a part in the overall achievement of the goal. And then you as a parent, you want to make sure that these goals and objectives that are developed, that they maintain rigor. You do not want your child to, their educational experiences in high school to be compromised because of April Dunn. Never is supposed to be that way, okay? Now, this is so key, and it's important for you as a parent. This is one of those timelines you've got to keep an eye on. These goals and objectives have to be created and applied. That means written into that IEP within the first 30 days of your child entering the course. Got it? So start a school. Let's say school starts August 1. It's never that clean, right? Never that easy. They start August 1. From the day they set foot in that English class, algebra class, science, biology, whatever it is that has a LEAP assessment at the end of it. Remember, I told you, not all courses have a LEAP at the end of it. It's your Englishes, your math, your sciences, and your histories, your governments. Those have end of courses with them. From the minute they set foot in that class, that clock, that 30-day clock starts ticking. You have 30 days to get those goals and objectives written and applied. Okay? After those 30 days, you cannot go back. And this is the law. And the reason I say this is the law is that the department cannot change this. The department cannot say, I'm so sorry, you applied April Dunn on day 31. We'll give you a break. Their hands are tied. The law says 30 days. Now, you ask yourself, Rebecca, or you ask me, does that mean 30 calendar days? Or does that mean 30 business days? Or does that mean, what does it mean? The law just says 30 days. So the department leaves it up to the district to make that decision. Okay? Now, let's talk about, I want to make sure, are there any questions related to that? Because next we're going to talk about what courses do you choose to apply performance criteria to? You know, just because your child is eligible for April Dunn does not mean you have to apply April Dunn. Remember, I told you there's 3 silos. Think in terms of eligibility, application, documentation of achievement. Just because your child's eligible doesn't mean you have to apply. If I were a parent and my child had a strength, was strong, man, mastery in math in middle school, I would probably, not 100% sure, but I would probably not apply April Dunn in Algebra 1. Not the first time. I would give him a chance to show me what he can really do. Now, that may scare you. It may worry you, and you may go, oh, no. I want a safety net. And that's all fine and good. I understand that. That your child can still achieve. They can still master that LEAP assessment in algebra with April Dunn applied. It does not, if they achieve the state benchmark on a state assessment in high school, it does not make them ineligible for April Dunn any longer. Once they are eligible, they're always eligible, unless they become a student that is no longer eligible for SPED services. Okay? So the safety net can be put in place. So when you're choosing which courses to apply, you want to keep that in mind. You want to look at your child's strengths and weaknesses relative to their disability. All right, I'm sorry, I said I was going to take questions and I jumped right on into choosing courses. Are there any questions so far? I get pumped up about this, get excited. Okay, so you're going to review the data. What data are you going to review? Well, look at if he's in high school and he's facing, you're sitting down with your IEP team in the first 30 days of school, and he's facing a possible ELA 1 and Algebra 1 assessment. How did he do in English in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade? How did he do on the assessment? If he scored a basic or a mastery, or, if he scored a basic or above, you may not apply April Dunn to English. You may just apply it to algebra. You want to look at his grades. How did he do in English in middle school? All right. You also definitely want to review something that's called an individual graduation plan, IGP for short. When your child enters the 9th grade, he should have filled out an individual graduation plan. Does someone have a question? Okay. An individual graduation plan is something that the state of Louisiana issued. It's a document, it's a form, and it's basically like a course of study for all of your child's high school years. It's sort of where things are mapped out. You're going to have it mapped out as to what he's going to take in the 9th grade, what he's going to take in the 10th, what he's going to take in the 11th, what he's going to take in the 12th. That's in addition to his schedule for just that year, right? You want to have that schedule. You want to have that IGP in front of you. It's very important to know what's coming up so that you can make decisions as to what you want to apply April Dunn to. Then with all this information, you can determine on a course by course, year by year basis what you want to apply. You're only going to make a decision for 1 year at a time. You just know coming down the road, we might have an IBC coming up, you know, we might not. We might have geometry coming up. So just have those tools in front of you to be able to make some good decisions. Okay, let's talk about, speaking of tools and helping you and your child make some good decisions, we've put together this next portion of this presentation to really give you some ideas as to how you can help your child succeed. As a parent of a child with a disability, there are action steps that you can take to ensure that your child is examined for eligibility for the April Dunn Act and that the IEP team applies the provisions in a timely manner while upholding rigorous and high expectations. So action step number 1 to helping your child succeed. Know when your child will and should be examined for eligibility for the April Dunn Act. At a minimum, your child should be examined for eligibility upon entering the 9th grade, and if they're not eligible when they enter the 9th grade, in high school after taking any LEAP 2025 state assessment. Okay, 2 crucial points. If they're made eligible upon the 9th grade, then guess what? Probably don't have to worry about that second bullet anymore because they're eligible. If they're not, you got to keep an eye on those assessments and the results of those assessments once they're in high school. Be prepared to discuss your child's eligibility for the April Dunn Act when they're entering the 9th grade, like Emma. If your child's not eligible upon entering high school, be prepared to re-examine eligibility each time your child takes a high school state assessment, like Malik. If your child's IEP team does not discuss the April Dunn Act, please ask about the law and when your child will be examined for eligibility. All right, I see a question. Okay, Latrice said, I'm just learning about this. Hey, I'm glad you're here. So action step 2 to helping your child succeed. Action step 2, know your child's assessment scores. You're welcome, no problem. I'm glad you're here. So know your child's assessment scores. Play a role in your child's life when it comes to this part. I know a lot of times it's hard to understand. I completely understand that. I really do. But if you start digging into it, it's a big elephant. If you start taking a little bite of the elephant at a time, you'll become more and more familiar with some of these action steps that you need to do. So your child meets eligibility for April Dunn when they enter high school. Remember, there's 2 criteria. One relates to entering high school, like Emma. The other relates to already being in high school, like Malik. So the first way is they enter high school and they don't achieve those state benchmarks for 2 of the 3 most recent school years. Or they enter high school and they are not eligible and they start taking those high school state assessments and they don't achieve the state established benchmarks after 2 attempts of the same high school assessment. Now, you can only use, remember, once they've taken their first state assessment, you can no longer use the middle school scores anymore. Okay? Eligibility for the April Dunn Act is based on LEAP state assessment scores. Therefore, knowing the scores your child makes on a LEAP state assessment beginning in the 6th grade would be useful information to bring into an IEP meeting for discussing eligibility. Action step 3, know when the April Dunn Act must be applied to your child's courses. The law requires April Dunn Act to be applied to a course within the first 30 days of a student entering the course. It's extremely important that your child's IEP team review eligibility for the law and establish alternate means or goals and objectives prior to that 30-day deadline. Okay? Action step 4, review the individual performance criteria or the goals and objectives to ensure that they maintain the rigor and the high expectations required of any other student. The April Dunn Act does not give IEP teams the authority to compromise the standards or the requirements of any course. All IEP teams are expected to develop goals and objectives that address the entire course, maintain the rigor and expectations of academic achievement, and do not compromise the standards of the course. Okay, a resource for you. Vanessa, I see your question, and if it's okay with you, we're going to finish this presentation, and then I'm going to address that question. The Louisiana Department of Education has resources related to the April Dunn Act for your use. I showed them to you on the website, and we're going to go back there and glance at them real quick. The April Dunn Act, an alternate means to graduation for students with disabilities, is a great resource. The next several slides will direct you to the Students with Disabilities Library, a library of full information, including the April Dunn Act. So I want you to know that, remember the process that I showed you in the very beginning of this presentation as to how to get with the Students with Disability, get to the Students with Disabilities Library front on the Louisiana Believes website? Well, these slides are showing you that same exact process. So if you forgot that process, or just in case if you're anything like me, you don't even remember what you did last night, right? So if you don't remember it and I went too fast for you to take notes, these slides will show you how to get there again, okay? So you're gonna go to the beginning of the website, the very first page, the home page of louisianabelieves.com. You're going to click on library there, it's circled, right? Then you're going to click on category. Then you're going to click on students with disabilities. And then you're going to scroll, this is the Students with Disabilities Library. If you've never been there, there's a lot of stuff there. Not just April Dunn, there's a lot of other stuff there too. Then you're going to scroll about halfway down that page and you'll see the April Dunn Act resources. Okay. Now, I think earlier Ashley put both my and her email address in the chat box. Please, if you do send a question, please send it to both of us. All right. Okay. Ms. Cowan's question is, once the student is April Dunn, does the student have to continue to take the LEAP 2025 assessments twice if they failed the first time? And the answer to that question is no, they do not. They take it the one time and then don't. Now the reason I can say no, I need everybody to understand, Ms. Cowan has done a very good job of giving this question a platform, right? So she has said once the student is April Dunn eligible, that's after eligibility has been determined. Because remember, one of the eligibility criteria requires them to take it twice. What I'm talking about is they're already eligible. They've got goals and objectives applied. Her question is, they failed the test. Do they have to take it again? And the answer to that is no, because they've got goals and objectives, but they have to achieve those goals and objectives. Now, let's talk about this for a second. You will find that sometimes in a district, some districts will ask your child to take that test again, regardless of April Dunn. And there's a multitude of reasons that they can ask that. But I will tell you, one reason is, if your child, let's say your child's in English. Everybody listening, follow me on this. Your child's in English 1, and they have a score, good Lord, their score is the lowest possible D that they can get, right? It's so low that one more point and they fail. And they've got April Dunn applied. And they take the test. And that they score on that test so low, it's like one of the lowest scores you can get. That test counts for 5% of your child's grade in English, in any course, any subject, any course that has an associated end of course test. It counts for 5%. It's figured in to their grade. If that score is so low on that assessment that it causes your child's grade to go from a D to an F, April Dunn can't save them. They're failing. And they got to take that class over again. So there could be, that's why when you guys ask me, do they have to take the test over again? I don't have a pat answer. It's a scenario answer. It depends. Okay? So it's important to understand there's sometimes not a pat answer. But in general, the answer to Ms. Cowan's question is, if their grade is high enough and they've taken the test and they failed it and they've got April Dunn applied, no, they do not have to take the test again. But there may be reasons as to why someone says, let's take the test again. Okay? So it's important for you to go in with an open mind and have that discussion. And you have my email, you have Ashley's email. So if you have a question, email us both and say, my IEP team is saying this. What do you think about this? Okay? All right. If we don't have any more questions, I think we're going to go ahead. I think Miss Latrice said, my son has a B in U.S. history, but had to take the test over. Hey, Latrice, I'm going to ask you to email me and Ashley with your scenario, if you don't mind. And we're going to handle that one off. Remember, it's not that I don't want to answer your question in this public venue. Not at all. That's not the problem. The problem is I don't want to answer your question. It's a particular scenario, right? It's your son. I want to talk to you about your son's scenario because your son's scenario might not fit Ms. Cowan's son's scenario. And I don't want to give an answer and all of you walk away with, well, Rebecca said, because then we might be making a wrong decision for your child, and that's not good. So this is kind of an outlier one-off kind of thing. So go ahead and email us that question, and we may actually request a phone call with you instead to make sure that we understand. All right. All right. If you guys don't have any questions, you're so welcome, Ms. Boudreaux. And if you're on this call and you work for a district, I would love to see you making this presentation available for your parents. I think does a pretty good job at getting rid of all the jargon, all the language that we use as educators, and talking about April Dunn in a more parent-friendly way. I want to thank all of y'all for joining us. We really appreciate an opportunity to get to present to our parents.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Ashley, for being here and presenting this information. It's always been a just a mess to me as well to understand all of it. So we really appreciate it very much.
No problem. Thanks for inviting us.
All right, everyone. I did drop a survey in the chat box. If you wouldn't mind just clicking on that and completing a brief survey evaluation for me, I'd appreciate it. And other than that, please check in with us for another webinar soon. Thank you.